Welcome to this Forge College Explainer. Okay, so we're going to humorously, but very clearly, guide you through translating your hard-earned Ethereum knowledge into some serious Solana superpowers. I'm your host, and today we're tackling a massive paradigm shift. Look, if you're coming from the EVM world, your muscle memory for access control is likely heavily rooted in Solidity. But as you make the jump into Rust and Anchor, yeah, you're going to need a completely new mental model.
Consider this your survival guide. We'll be covering EVM to SVM access checks, the account-first paradigm, Solidity versus Anchor mapping, a side-by-side code walkthrough, handling dynamic roles, and finally, key takeaways and next steps.
Section 1. EVM to SVM access check. All right, let's just address the elephant in the room right off the bat. It's the panic-inducing question literally every EVM dev asks on day one of Solana. Wait, where did my MSG.sender go? Look, the culture shock is totally real. You suddenly realize Solana doesn't have this magical, globally available MSG.sender variable. And those compact little modifiers that magically protect your logic? Gone. In Ethereum, MSG.sender is the absolute bedrock of access control. But here, we have to rethink the whole shebang.
Now, in our previous lesson, Survey of Solidity Access Control Patterns, we completely mastered owner-based checks and tight modifiers. We mapped roles, we required things, we reverted. It was a great time. But now we have to physically untangle all of that logic from internal contract storage. Solana just requires a totally different approach to tracking who is actually allowed to execute a function.
Section 2. The account-first paradigm.
So this is the core of how Anchor operates. In Anchor, ownership and authority are expressed through accounts and the constraints you place on them. Think of Anchor's account deserialization as a super strict velvet rope at an exclusive club. It checks your VIP pass before you even step foot near the front door. It's an automated phase where declarative constraints, like requiring an account to be a signer or using the has-one macro, are strictly enforced before your program logic even thinks about running.
Notice the stark contrast here, because it's actually pretty fascinating. Solidity is like the bouncer checking your ID inside the club, while Anchor demands your signature and account shape before you even cross the threshold. In the EVM, the transaction starts, hits a modifier, checks MSG.sender against internal storage, and violently throws you out with a revert if you fail. Anchor, on the other hand, is that velvet rope outside. If the client doesn't provide the exact correct accounts, in the correct order, with the correct signatures, bam! The transaction is rejected during deserialization. Not a single line of your custom logic executes.
Section 3. Solidity versus Anchor mapping.
So the crucial point here is knowing exactly how to bridge that EVM muscle memory over to SVM primitives. Let's map this out one-to-one. Look at the first row, your classic owner storage variable plus the onlyOwner modifier that maps directly to Anchor's has-one and signer constraints, which are enforced at deserialization. Row 2, a Solidity role mapping becomes a specific account field or maybe a separate PDA role account enforced at runtime. And finally, row 3, our dearly departed MSG sender is simply replaced by the signer constraint. Pretty neat, right?
Section 4. Side-by-side code walkthrough.
Okay, time to roll up our sleeves and look at the actual code to see these primitives in action. Here's how an ownable pattern looks in Rust. In step 1, our program initialization basically mirrors the Solidity constructor, setting the initial owner. But step 2 is where the magic really happens. Notice how the owner resides inside an account struct, forcing the client to pass the correct accounts and signatures instead of relying on hidden context. We define a restricted action account struct using has1 equals owner and force the owner account to be a signer. Then, in step 3, your handler logic finally executes. But remember, you only get to step 3 if the velvet rope allows it.
Section 5. Handling dynamic roles.
But what happens when the velvet rope just isn't enough to capture your complex access logic? Because, let's face it, simple declarative macros can't magically solve everything. For dynamic roles or time-based permissions, you're going to have to bypass the declarative macros and write explicit conditional checks right inside your instruction body. If you're building multi-step delegation, time-based authority, complex role hierarchies, or validating specific program-derived addresses, yeah, the has1 macro won't save you there. You'll need to read the mutable on-chain state, compare keys explicitly, and return an anchor error code if the caller isn't authorized. It's actually very similar to how you'd write a custom require statement in Solidity.
So here's a quick sandbox challenge for you focused learners. Try wiring up a custom program-derived address that grants a secondary admin access to your restricted action. Take a brief second to think about how you'd alter that restricted action struct. You know you can't just use a simple has1 if either the owner or the admin can call it, right? You'd need to accept both potential accounts and write a runtime check inside your handler. Give it a shot. It's absolutely the perfect way to test your new SVM mental model.
Section 6. Key takeaways and next steps.
Let's debrief and see how this builds our foundation for the rest of the course. Remember these 3 golden rules. First, prioritize the account-first velvet rope by using declarative constraints like signer and has1. Second, embrace explicit runtime checks when things get complex, like with dynamic roles. And third, prepare for entirely new failure semantics. Your clients now have the massive responsibility of passing the right accounts in the right order with the right signatures. And if they fail, they don't get a simple Solidity string revert. They get Anchor's program result errors.
Master the primitives? Get ready to build. Up next, implementing Ownable in Rust and Anchor. Now that you've got the mental model down, visit Forge College to learn more about this subject and other Web3 related topics. And dive into our next lesson, where we turn all these concepts into shipping code. But before we go, ask yourself this. If Anchor's velvet rope checks your VIP status at the door, what hidden vulnerabilities could be lurking inside your actual logic once you're safely in the club? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining this Forge College Explainer. Keep building, and we'll see you next time.